there's lots in your special in the comedy that you do that is about like a defiant self-love. So I definitely want us to like think about that, and use this moment to assert against this like shameless kind of hateful normativity. What it is to like demand a level of being seen and like being validated for who you are. Yeah, because I think like that's the kind of politics folks crave, honestly. Like,
Yeah.
and speaking of crave, what a transition. Let's talk about Heated Rivalry as a show that I know you've posted like here and there on, and those posts have been really, really funny. But a show that is about love, that's about like a defiant love. This is a show that is not just about hockey culture, but is I think like almost this like mini referendum on what hockey players represent for folks in Canada and Russia, like these two cultures in particular.
Hmm.
But yeah. So I mean, first of all, just generally, before I like throw a question at you, what is your sense of the cultural impact of this very buzzworthy like show, and what it has meant for folks in Canada?
Oh, there's a lot of Canadian pride around the show's success.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, like whenever we see American media sharing anything about the show, there's usually if you look at the comments, there'll be some people be like, "I've never been prouder to be Canadian." My God, because so little of our media it feels breaks through in America, and what a thing to
Mm,
have gained traction and popularity like a gay hockey love story. Who would have predicted, you know?
indeed.
And and so oh well, see now I've forgotten the question.
Yeah, just your general sense of what it means, in Canada. Because like I want us to talk about like when the show arrives at a certain moment in like the evolution of hockey and hockey culture, which is still like a pretty misogynistic, like problematic culture. But yeah,
Yeah.
that was sort of where I was going.
And yeah, thank you for putting me back on track. It really in the past 4-ish years we've seen this pushback against anti-DEI and anti-diversity
Mm-hmm.
and anti-woke in general.
Mm-hmm.
And this show really proves that this this pendulum swing back against marginalized communities, it it lacks. I mean, it's a bit superficial because we all still crave diverse love stories, and a lot of us continue to fight against this patriarchal expectation of our entertainment, of of sports culture. Like there are a lot of gay hockey fans, and the NHL has been pretty disappointing uh in its acknowledgement of the queer community. Like some teams will do their pride events, and then some of their players will hide behind religion or
Mm-hmm.
culture to basically speak bigotry towards the gay community. But and the NHL has always been like hands off, like, oh, don't get us involved. Everyone's cool, just playing it perfectly safe. And so I feel like Heated Rivalry really extends into a criticism of uh, and the NHL as an institution, and hockey culture in general. The fact that it's very white, straight, cis centered.
Totally. Yeah, I agree, and I appreciate you reminding me of the, still recent scandal of the NHL deciding to make it more or less prohibit showing of solidarity, right, with LGBTQ plus communities. That like you can't put rainbow tape on your hockey sticks. You can't, they basically just decided, as you say, to exempt themselves from taking a
Yeah.
position. But the truth is, sports is always political. I mean, we just saw, the Olympics in Italy, and the fact that there was like an American, I forget the sport the athlete played, who was basically saying like, I just want to distance myself right now from like ice, basically, and more like not even really condemning like straight up American fascism and Trumpism. And, even that like mild intervention was met with all of this vitriol on the right in the United States. And, one of the jokes that you've been like developing for a while is around the, Turkish boxer who received all of this, right? Turkish boxer who received all of the
Algerian. Yeah.
Algerian, thank you. Received all of this strange, like transphobic, like backlash. There in the United States, one of the major flashpoints has been trans inclusion in sports, just in general. Even though it's a tiny percentage of athletes who are trans, maybe we can zoom out a little bit and talk about like the role of comedy in exposing this transphobic hostility to trans like inclusion of trans folks in sport. Because like I just recently saw there was a video that went viral by the sports TikToker Coach Jackie. I don't know if you saw this, where Coach Jackie goes out and like
Oh,
asks transphobic protesters whether they know any athletes at all in women's sports. And
yes.
it's like so telling that folks literally couldn't list more than like one or two tops actual like women in sports. And yet they're there supposedly defending the integrity of women's sports, right? It's like to me that can you maybe speak to like how comedy can be used to almost like embarrass folks that are adopting this like totally hypocritical position?
Oh man. Well, a few things come to mind right away. I mean, first of all, just the rage I feel that they would continue to push this narrative that they're protecting women when in the end they were proven time and time again not to have the faintest interest in women's sports at all. Just this idea of justice. And it's not about protecting women, as we've seen in Kansas City's license law that they just passed. Like, who are you protecting? Which women are you protecting by revoking trans people their driver's licenses? Really? Which children are you protecting? So, this facade that it's about women's sports and protecting women and children is so stupid that comedy is a digestible way of putting a mirror up in front of it and being like, this is really what these people think. And to have a laugh at its expense is is a way to soften the rage that you righteously feel when you see that these people are mounting like an ever growing campaign, an effective legal campaign against trans people. So I feel like comedy can be very memorable for that reason as well. Is people don't typically remember what you say, they remember how you made them feel. And so comedy is a perfect device to sort of bring those two closer together, because if they've elicited a laugh from you and uh, an evocation of surprise, then you will more likely remember what was attached to that. The messaging was behind that, being that these people are full of shit.
Yeah, that I think that's super insightful, and it lines up with it reminds me of a conversation I had with another podcast guest who talked about like basically how people learn. That as you say, like the way memory works basically is like you don't really remember the event. You kind of remember your emotional reaction to the event, right? And so yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that's an interesting like way of thinking about the power comedy has. And it reminds me of like this one kind of it feels like pivotal moment in a special that I don't think you fully like released broadly yet, which is called Face to Face.
Yeah.
Very intimate special. There's a moment in that special where you talk about the dehumanizing of trans folks on talk shows from the 90s, like Maury Povich and like Jerry Springer. And I remember those shows. It was such a kind of, rude awakening to hear you talk about them because I wasn't struggling as a cis dude exactly with this level of assault almost that those shows presented. But you talked about how like that was the only presentation of transness that you were exposed to earlier in your life, and that contributed to a lot of like shame and closetedness. But again, like it's not the special, while it is kind of more vulnerable than just like a tight hour of jokes, does have humor in it. And what you say in there is like you give a description of one of these episodes where like you bring out women, and the theme or the concept, the whatever is the premise is it a he or is it a she, right? Like as though it's all cut and dry. We're gonna figure it
Mhm.
out. We're gonna expose this. And you say like these beautiful women are standing in front of a hillbilly fucking audience where Cletus gets to vote on whether people are trans or cis. Was it a little bit cathartic? Was it like was it interesting to kind of go back and reflect on those experiences watching these weird popular daytime talk shows from the 90s?
Oh, that's so interesting because personally, like when you watch that special, it is an hour of me basically improvising premises that I kind of had in mind, and then I would just sort of talk them out confessional style. And I remember that bit in particular being one that I couldn't quite solve at the
Mm-hmm.
end with
Mm-hmm.
like a big payoff and a big punch like I was finding naturally with all the others. And in retrospect, I think that indicates that I haven't healed enough from something like that to be able to find some kind of incisive, funny perspective on it because it still makes me angry. It feels like experiences like those stole years from my life
Mm-hmm.
because they just projected so much shame onto what I was dealing with in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
yeah,
I get
yeah.
that. I get that, you know? It's weird how powerful like TV during that kind of vulnerable era of your life can be,
Mm,
because you don't yet have the level of scrutiny that you have as an adult to be like, well, this show's just stupid and written by stupid people and created by folks that haven't been exposed to actual like diverse experiences. The shows that really got under my skin were often like sitcoms that were so normative, in their depiction of, what popularity looks like or whatever, like social capital looks like. They can make those shows can make you feel kind of worthless, actually.
mm,
And stand up is an interesting like genre or kind of entertainment because as you said in your episode of your podcast before recording the special, um like it's just you trying to capture a moment in time, right? Like a stand-up special, and this actually makes it into the special as a premise, I think. Like a stand-up special itself is like a snapshot of who the comedian is at that time and place. And I just wondered if you wanted to like talk about what you're writing now and how that's helping you figure out like how to take that snapshot, like there
mm.
because there are lots and lots of comics like Bill Burr's last special is about like his mortality or whatever. Not a big Bill Burr fan, but like it's
Ah,
it's at least him showing like I am actually evolving into something more vulnerable, right?
yeah.
you know how's that sort of relationship to the special as a snapshot evolving too?
Mm. That that special really dealt with themes of appearance and identity
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and how closely linked sometimes how these things are parallel to each other and how they also overlap. Gender affirmation versus vanity was like a huge theme. Like what is it? What is identity?
Mm.
Is it how you look on the outside? How deep does it go? And I was asking all these big questions before this facial surgery because I didn't know what my life would be like on the other side of it. And as far as a hierarchy of needs goes, I have to say, gratefully, uh, having facial feminization surgery is a huge privilege, and it has made my life so much easier. And I almost hate to admit that, because it is also to admit that we live in a very gendered, superficial society where the better I can pass, the more respect I'm treated with, the more affirmation I'm granted. It seems unfair. However, now being the beneficiary of all this assimilation, now that I assimilate a lot easier, um, my hierarchy of needs, you know, fighting for that place in society is a bit easier covered, I guess. And so now the next things I'm tackling are I'm writing a lot about relationships and dating now,
Cool.
because that's sort of my next frontier, is finding somebody just for me and navigating a modern, um, metropolitan, maybe, uh, dating universe, a very queer, uh, dating universe that seems to really like polyamory. And I'm not quite, I don't know if that's what I need or want right now for myself. And so a lot of my material is about relationships and dealing with that. But also there are a few political things that relationships are also political. Like, it bleeds into politics. Politics, when you're trans, everything is political. And I think otherwise everything really truly is political for all of us. But I guess more thoroughly right now for somebody
Yeah.
like me.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, we talk about polarization. There is like unprecedented polarization. You could argue. But yeah, I mean, I'm really interested to hear more about that, question of like how we exist and are seen as sexual beings. But you talk about it in Face to Face. You talk, as you mentioned, like it's in many ways like a major theme is gender affirmation versus vanity. And you say basically in the special, these things all intersect, whether we like it or not. Like it all intersects, and it intersects, and it comes down to whether or not you feel validated, seen, valued. And you keep coming back to this question of like people asking you, why can't you just make peace with yourself? And you don't specifically like name it a challenge, like almost like an unfair challenge. Why can't you just make peace with yourself? But it does feel like that's what you're engaging with. And I like the comparison you make to folks that are inclined to look for ways of like signaling to others that they love themselves, like tattoos or Viagra. These are the examples you give.
Ah,
Um, can you talk about how like it's a really like for you almost universal thing to look to these signifiers as a way of, as you say in the special, reestablishing who we are for ourselves?
I think there are different lengths people will go to make that peace. And to most people from the outside, transition is the most extreme form of making that peace. So to them, it's unfathomable that, these people, not to diminish whatever self-esteem or self-image issues that they're going through, but a lot of these people probably, are dealing with their own like self-image issues. And so we all have our struggles. And so to somebody like that, transitioning and entering into this stigmatized group of society just seems silly. This is one of those disingenuous things that I keep seeing a lot of transphobic people who claim to be, they're like, I'm all for LGB without the T, Let flamboyant young gay men grow up to be flamboyant gay men. There's nothing wrong with that. I've never had a problem with that. And first of all, those people are being so disingenuous,
Oh yeah.
because those are exactly the same people who would bully that kid 100%. And on top of that, it still boils down to the same gender norms that men should be men and young boys shouldn't behave that way. It all belongs to the same harsh, sometimes violent gender norms that we confine each other to.
Yeah.
And so anybody like me, any trans person, deviating outside of those things and finding that peace outside of staying within their assigned gender at birth is challenging to a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, I was part of a training session where, a trans educator was explaining that, you know, the various measures that folks take who identify as trans, it's really about trying to, kind of narrow the gap between sense of self and lived experience. And people take different levels of measures, right, to kind of bring those things into alignment and find peace. But at the end of the day, the notion of begrudging others for what they require to find their peace and protect their peace, it shows an utter lack of empathy and a sort of narcissism or solipsism. And that's another thing that you tackle in the special is the lack of empathy that seems to exist in contemporary culture, and that you suggest has maybe always been a struggle or a thing that people have to struggle for. I was not aware of the story of Phineas Gage before
Yeah.
watching the special. It's just unbelievable, the run that you do on Phineas Gage. Um, I don't know if you want to spoil that joke at all, but how you set it up is so brilliant. So this is a guy who has an unbelievable traumatic brain injury and somehow survives. And then even after this is dealt with as he's just a buzzkill or whatever. But the truth
Yeah.
of it is he's a key figure in understanding the neurobiology of how the brain relates to our personalities and stuff, right? It's just it's such an incredible bit. Can you talk about that at all?
Oh, I'm trying to I with that bit, I'm trying to give a more optimistic
Mm-hmm.
idea of empathy, because it really is so easy for us to all look around and go, what's with all this cruelty? Why is cruelty popular now? What is with this hostility towards compassion for each other? And it's easy to throw your hands in the air and be like, well, everyone's a dick now.
Mm-hmm.
But I was trying to basically suggest that maybe it's a matter of education. Maybe it's in
Mm-hmm.
human nature to forget that another human being exists. Maybe since we're all the main characters of our own story, we think from a very selfish lens. And so, and it's a working theory, I'm still working on it, but what I'm trying to suggest is that education can override that human impulse to be closed-minded to other people and to forget other people's experiences might be different from ours. And so I was using that story as a device to basically say, you know, unless we get reminded sometimes how harsh sometimes how everyone else is fighting their own dragons, we might still fall victim to seeing a guy with a hole in his head and being like, I don't like hanging out with that guy. What's his deal?
Yeah.
What's that guy's problem?
Right. Oh my gosh, it's such a powerful bit, and there's a lot of punchlines. The wind whistling through his head hole, and there's all this insane stuff. And I wanted to go back to I think, really special episode of your podcast that you put out before the special itself, where you actually say in that episode that because you're kind of working through almost your fear of improvising an hour special in the
Mm-hmm.
episode. And you say the challenge for you in part is knowing that because you know how comedy works, you've been doing it for almost 2 decades or roughly 2 decades, and you say improvising the setups is going to be more difficult than improvising the punchlines, and that all of these ingredients are needed in order to achieve that sort of rhythm, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can you? I was really curious to hear you talk more about because you didn't dive fully into it in the episode, but that was the thing that stood out to me. Why is it in some ways more difficult to improvise a setup versus improvising the there's another term for it, right? The stings or the tags, right?
The
Improvising the
tags,
tags.
yeah.
Why is it that setups are trickier?
If you think about it like ingredients, the punchline always falls on the last word or the last few words, but everything that gets you there is most of the content.
Mm,
And so you have to be very deliberate and delicate about how you create a reality for your audience that will make those last few words surprising,
mm-hmm.
you know? And especially when you're dealing with such vulnerable material, you are also risking bumming people out. so so there's a very fine line. There's a delicate balance in setting up those jokes because you have to make sure you cover the humanity of what you're trying to say, the conciseness of it. You can't be too wordy or you can't
Mm-hmm.
drone on.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the clarity of the message. You got to feel like everyone is on the same page before I hit you with this surprise at the end.
Hmm.
And the surprise is often easier because that's just less than 5% of the equation. How you
Right.
get there, the journey to get there is complicated.
That makes a ton of sense. I mean, you did an extraordinary job, nonetheless, in being able to like, because the trick when I've seen you live is the ability to think on your feet and to like use the environment and to circle back and to bring the audience in. Like, you're really skilled at those things.
Thank you.
Just for folks that note differences in wardrobe and records or who knows what. We were recording this about a week after our last conversation because there were so many disruptions, unexpected disruptions, of which there could be more. I don't know. And you were kind enough to make time again. But you know, since that conversation, we've had a little bit of a Instagram conversation in the background about Robbie Hoffman's special "Wake Up,"
Yep.
and I'm super interested to hear your take. I don't know if you wanted to maybe start by talking about Robbie Hoffman's quite popular, I think, Netflix special "Wake Up," and maybe we can take it from there.
Yeah. I think this is the thing is a lot of people will hear criticisms of like the more edgy envelope pushing comedy as like a party poopery progressive
Mm,
anti comedy position. Like I'm coming at this from a comedian's perspective when I say this that to me like the special was there was a lot of good stuff in there that I thought
mhm,
was very clever and profoundly counterculture and very insightful and fun and challenging. But it comes back to ever since I learned about the modern reality of HIV and AIDS, my only criticism is that, you know, AIDS jokes in 2016, 2026 are hacky. And I'm saying this as a comedian. It's like you're going up there and talking as it's an outdated reference. And at that point, like, couldn't you have like educated yourself a little bit enough to like make a different joke? I don't know. I'm not saying this because I'm overly sensitive. Oh, you can't say that. I'm just saying as a comedian, I just feel like that was my biggest issue. Every time I see an AIDS joke, I'm like,
mm,
oh, okay.
yeah.
You didn't that is such basic. It almost did a disservice to the rest of like the really risky content that she was going for. That it
Hmm.
was like bisexual guys will give you AIDS. Oh,
Shit, yeah. I mean, for
and
God's
yeah,
sakes, AIDS is not over. And I think like there's a weird way in which jokes about AIDS in 2026 sort of presuppose on some level that that pandemic is over, which it's like obviously not. It's just it went from being a death sentence to being sort of like a life sentence, as some people have put it. There are ways in which
yeah.
it's treated, but I don't know. I mean, does that resonate for you, or is that out to lunch?
I no, I do agree with that, but I think in what I'm criticizing is like the modern context of a joke like that. Like it's not the 80s anymore where getting HIV from a closeted bisexual man or something was a terrible stigmatized death sentence. It's like once you learn what HIV is now in 2026, that it's this like irrelevant, uh, easily livable. People who have it, the medicine has miraculously grown since then, and you can live with it. I just think it's this weird, like hacky, stigmatized
Mm,
button that comedians press because they know it gets a laugh. And at that point,
right.
like, are you really challenging your audience? That's what
Hmm.
I say. The rest of your act is this proudly, bravely challenging thing, and
Yeah.
then you slipped in the hackiest, like AIDS, when like that's
Yeah.
not. It's it's just factually wrong. I think that's my thing,
That's brilliant. I
and that's
think, and yeah, I mean, like, sorry, go ahead.
and I draw that parallel to like, of course you can joke about trans people, but I think where my problem, what my problem as a comedian is be honest. And if you're going to
Mm,
be this honest truth teller, then get your facts right, you
hmm.
know? And I that's why I think like some trans jokes are hacky as hell because they're wrong and they perpetuate stigmatisms that are just factually wrong. So you're just being a hack up there,
Hmm.
or in this case like an AIDS joke. And otherwise like the special was fun. Some I found parts of it cool and interesting and challenging, and that's my one criticism is seeing jokes like those that are just factually wrong. Get the facts right.
Mm.
I
It
don't know.
reminds me of Camille Nanjiani's special from way back when, Beta Male, where he talks about like playing Call of Duty as a kid who grew up in Pakistan, and like there's a mission in that game that is set in his hometown of Karachi, and he's like, they're speaking the wrong language. You've spent millions of dollars getting every grain of whatever correct in the game, and you couldn't like Google search what language they speak in Karachi.
Yeah.
So yeah, I take your point that like it's a little lazy, it's kind of hacky, and that being honest about these really in a lot of ways still like precarious identity positions that people have is kind of irresponsible too, right? Like you're
Mm.
potentially feeding into some of the worst tendencies of the right to relegate, trans folks, for example, to like a position of just perpetual trauma. Who knows, right? Or
Yeah.
misunderstanding or dysphoria. It's like the truth of human experience is much more textured, multi-layered, complex, and so yeah, I mean, it's to your point of, and this is something that we talked about last time, but I don't think it got captured. Was there's a distinction between comics and comedians. One says funny things, the other says things in a funny way. This is something that you've used as sort of a touchstone. Like hitting the button, as you were saying earlier, might just mean triggering discomfort around stigma or stereotypes or whatever. Can you maybe expand on this idea as like a almost like a principle of how you approach comedy?
Yeah. And this is, I would definitely apply this to Robbie's special that, like, what elevates a comedian to a comic. The saying is a comedian says funny things, a comic says things funny. And once you as a comedian have learned joke craft and you know how to write a joke and tighten it up and everything, what separates the better comedians, the comics from the comedians, is a unique ability to deliver those jokes in an outstanding way, or a way,
Mm.
or a memorable way, or to take the joke craft and apply a much more unique perspective to it. And that's what I appreciated about Robbie's set is she does have a unique perspective on a lot of things, and her delivery in particular is like very true to her own and very distinct. And so that's what I always strive to be is like, sure, once you've got the premise down and the joke structure, how can you deliver it in a way that people will always associate this is an Ava Val joke because of the way I heard it and saw it, and the element of surprise where it happened in that joke, you know?
Yeah, and I think like in our prior conversations, I've talked about like your physicality on stage, and you're so good at using that aspect of what you bring, right? You're
Sure.
very self-aware about that. You're willing to kind of clown it up a little bit, like hop on a stool or whatever, like to just really use, the body in a way that comics that you really appreciate, like Hannah Gatsby, use in a totally distinct way. Hoffman has that too, and it is like an aggressive, yelly, kind of like quasi, it feels like kind of masculine in some ways. Like
Yeah.
there's a
Yeah,
degree to
yeah.
which it's like attempting to own that. And that's
Hmm.
interesting too, right? Like there's a kind of arrogance to her special that,
Yeah.
is interesting.
Yeah, and the way she punctuates a lot of her punchlines is to like lean in and emphasize every syllable in the thing that
Mm-hmm.
she's saying. And it is a very aggressive, attacking
Mm-hmm.
delivery that not a lot of people can pull off in an endearing way. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's also part of it is sometimes it manifests itself physically, but of course it also has to do with like the delivery itself, the vocalization of the joke, and the emphasis on different syllables. And
Yeah. No, I mean, like it's all part of the art. So much of it is honed over like a million performances too. Like
yeah,
is, I find staggering when it comes to like thinking
mm,
about what you're seeing, which is like the end product of so much of that honing.
since a lot of my act is physical, and I come from a parallel stand-up and improv background, that's like think with your body first, and then let your mind sort of whatever gesture you make, let that sort of be the emotional engine that dictates what inspires your thought. You know what I mean? Like you enter a scene and you do this with your body, just let your body do a thing, and then all of a sudden, oh my god, my character is angry and gesticulating, and
Mm,
I'm coming in with that energy. And what's the first thing I can think of to sort of to vocalize
mm-hmm.
what's happening? And so I bring that energy on stage when I'm working out a bit or whatever, or working out tags. If I'm in the middle of an act out, how much further can I push it, and what pops into my head while my body is moving? And
Mm-hmm.
I think it definitely helps when I'm walking or swimming. My building
Right.
has a pool,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and I think the the meditative lull that moving my body gets me into, it just helps really generate. It just helps rev the engine of thought
Mm-hmm.
and helps really focus my attention on whatever it is I'm thinking of in that
Mm-hmm.
moment.
Yeah, 100%. I've talked to the songwriter Alexander Galan on the pod, and he said that like so often he's writing songs when he's walking, and he's like, he just said it offhandedly like that, and of course that makes sense because you're regulating your breathing. And I was like, that does make sense because you're regulating.
Yeah.
It is partly just about your breath and getting into like a flow. And I know what you mean because I've experienced that at times, but you have to be kind of comfortable, physically comfortable, or
Mm.
maybe I don't know, like the opposite can be true where stress elevates things in such a way that like all of your anxiety because of the performance and what it demands of you kind of has to fall away because of what is demanded of you. I don't know. But
Mm.
in terms of writing, like, the task of writing for yourself versus the task of writing for other people is something I wondered about because you write for various TV shows. There's a lot on your plate right now. You do have these kinds of jobs, and I'm sure you kind of have to look for this sort of work. But the task of writing for others and having people write for you is fundamentally different than trying to find your own way of saying things, right?
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about that? Because like some comics rely on writers, and I'm still like flabbergasted that that's a thing because how? It's such a
Yeah.
personal art.
Totally. And that is why I love stand up as an art form so much, is because you have complete ownership of your ideas and you stand behind them. And whenever I get suggestions for a tag or something like that, I'll often admit like it's a good tag, but
Mm-hmm.
if I can't find a way to do it with my own voice and my own conviction and have it fit organically and naturally in, then I'm not precious about swatting away other people's ideas. And that's why it is a fun challenge writing for other people whenever I get hired, because you do your best to sort of sit in their sensibilities and write from their perspective. But
Hmm.
of course, it'll just be so much easier tapping into, well, how do I feel about this? And writing from that perspective, stand up is so much easier once you really get closer in touch with yourself and your own emotional responses to different stimuli in the world. It
Hmm.
just makes it easier to write because you're like, that makes me angry. That frustrates me. And I have
Yeah.
something to say about that.
Yeah, yeah. And also, like, this brings me joy. Like, there's so much joy in your act, of course. Like, the way that you feed off the crowd is like, I think it'd be fascinating to see you actually have to deal with like a proper heckler. I'm sure you've had to, but like your tactic is so much about like just hitting people with love and inclusion, and like it is always like the vibes are always mostly a reciprocal thing, right?
Mhm.
But the heckler is such a figure of, a figurehead of menace in the comedy club in a weird way. But we face incredibly difficult times, and I don't want to take too much of your time. Your special that people need to check out is called So Brave. It's on 800 Pound Gorilla's YouTube channel. And in terms of bravery, like the last question I had was about like the specific kind of bravery or will maybe that it takes right now to still do comedy in such an incredibly grim moment. I was thinking about this looking at like different headshots for comedians because like, you know, I'm going to Ontario soon. I was like, can I check out some comedy there? And all these clubs have inevitably headshots of the comedians that are going to be performing there. And there is like a certain kind of mode that a comedian's headshot has to convey, right? If you're Bert
Uh,
Kreischer, it's just shirtless madness, like there's you know what I mean? And in
sure.
this moment, it feels particularly, I don't know about tone deaf, but definitely incongruous to be like foregrounding that sort of just uncomplicated joy, given how apocalyptic things feel right now. Are you not conflicted, but are you struggling at all with that will and that bravery to like be funny in this difficult moment?
I do. I gotta say, my entire stand-up journey has been, in some places, an active rebellion against cynicism. I think a lot of stand-up
Hmm.
comedians really fall into cynicism or enter into the art form already as cynical people, and of course that gives them their edge to sort of look at things sarcastically or with that edge, that frustrated insight. And I've always, I think, needed for myself, if I get corrupted by cynicism and I lose my hope in the world, then I feel like I will have lost everything that is precious to me personally off stage. And so I need to stay alive by retaining that sense of joy and of play, because without those things, I would truly despair. And so I think stand up is, of course, an extension of everything that I am as a person off stage. And that joy and that need to find the silver lining and to play and to spread hope and joy is an extension of what I'm really trying to always constantly provide for myself. Uh, is, yeah, just to not succumb to cynicism, especially in the face of ever growing despair in the world around us. And as a trans person, seeing this, the rise in hatred and dehumanization of people like me. So it's a survival instinct, I would say. And it 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 gives me a higher calling as well to hope to aim to provide that for other people. I want to give other people an outlet for, I want to give people access to hope and joy who might otherwise feel like they're losing all of it,
Yeah,
especially within my own community.
for sure. There's a central place for that, and you see it when you watch specials like yours. The kind of again that reciprocal thing that happens in the space. I felt it myself. So,
Yeah,
it's super important. And in Nova
yeah.
Scotia, we're seeing like arts cuts. and a sense that like somehow that's low-hanging fruit when, you know, a province is facing a deficit. You just like gut the arts. We know that like it's crucial for social trust and cohesion, and I feel like that's sort of what you're talking about. It's like those positive emotions of joy and hope, and trying to resist cynicism and despair, for God's sakes, you know.
Yeah, all of it. It's cynicism can be mobilizing for sure, and
Mm.
you see things that you want to change in the world, of course, but so can joy. Joy and hope can inspire you to action, to that
Mhm.
same level of world changing action. This is the thing is I want to make sure that I'm not being sort of ignorant of the state of the world, and I'm not being naive to it. Like, I still think I do an attentive job of addressing things as they are and acknowledging the challenges of transition and the challenges of navigating a world that is hostile to somebody like me in different ways. I acknowledge those things fully before I really get to the triumph of it. And that's what I want to illustrate, is that I'm not being naive or ignorant to the state of things, but I want to believe, and I want people to believe, that there's a way to conquer them, as long as we stay persistent and look for those opportunities.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, like, otherwise, what options do we have? Like, I think, you know,
Yeah.
things are dire, of course, but they can still get worse. There's a lot to still fight for sure. Thanks so much. I appreciate you, and I appreciate you making the time.
Thank you so much for having me. It's face to face on my Patreon is the special that I
Face to
encourage people
face.
to.
Thanks again, Ava. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me, as always.